Hello, third graders. So we are going to continue our story on George Washington Carver. So if you can get your history book and turn to page 211, you can pause the video if you need to do that. So we ended with George being in the Neosho, and he's going to school there, and he lives with Mariah and Andy Watkins. So George moves again. George learned all he could from the tiny school in Neosho. If he wanted to learn more, he would have to find a bigger school in another town. The Watkinses hated to part with him. They loved him as much as a son. Again, sad goodbyes were said. And again, George was completely on his own. From town to town he traveled. In many towns he would set up a laundry business. Soon the news spread around town that here was a young man who could launder, starch, and iron clothes better than any woman in town. George was proud of these comments. He was not ashamed to do honest work, no matter what it was. But he never dreamed of doing laundry for the rest of his life. Doing laundry was just a way to earn money to go to school. Page 212. George goes to college. George finally entered college. How did he pay his way through college? He did the other students' laundry. For a while, he studied art. His paintings were beautiful. He especially liked to paint flowers and plants. He had not forgotten his secret place in the woods. Then he began to study plants at Iowa State University. Here he found the answers to many of his questions. But there were always new questions to ask. When George graduated, he was one of the school's prize students. The college wanted George to keep working with their school. But Iowa State and George knew how important it was to study plants and the many different kinds of soil. Were there ways to help the soil grow better plants? Were there ways to make plants bigger and stronger? George Carver was finding ways. He loved his work. A new job. When someone does an excellent job, news spreads around. Many people heard of George Carver. Many wanted him to work for them, but George would always say no. One day, Booker T. Washington of Tuskegee, Alabama, heard about George Carver and the wonderful work he was doing with his plants. Remember who Booker T. Washington is? We talked about him. How poor the black farmer is in the South, thought Mr. Washington. Maybe Mr. Carver would come and work at Tuskegee. With that thought in mind, he sat down and wrote Mr. Carver a letter. As George read Mr. Washington's letter, he remembered that God has a plan for everyone. Perhaps this was God's plan for him. George Carver wrote Mr. Washington back. He would come to Tuskegee. Now we are on page 213. Professor Carver. When George Carver arrived at Tuskegee, Booker T. Washington greeted him and showed him around the school. You will be the Director of Agriculture, Mr. Carver. You will teach these students the right way to farm. Perhaps Mr. Carver was a little discouraged when he found out he had only 13 students. There were hundreds of other students at Tuskegee, but they felt that farming was uninteresting. At that time, some farms in the South grew only cotton. Perhaps these students did not want to pick cotton all their lives. From then on, he was known as Professor Carver. His students learned how to help the soil. They learned how to grow sweet potatoes and other vegetables. Soon the students learned that farming didn't just mean growing cotton. More and more students joined his class. Some vegetables, like peas and peanuts, help the soil. If cotton is grown all the time on the same soil, the soil will be too poor to grow anything. His students were learning. But what about the thousands of southern farmers who grew only cotton? Professor Carver traveled around visiting farmers. He found many of them growing cotton right up to the door of their cabins. "Don't sin against the land," he told them. "Grow vegetables. Grow sweet potatoes and peanuts." Now we are on page 214, Professor Carver's workshop. Professor Carver had a workshop where he did experiments. He began to experiment with the sweet potato and the peanut. He discovered many uses for the sweet potato. He made a flour from it to bake bread. He also made vinegar. Those were only 2 of the 118 uses he found for the sweet potato. The peanut amazed him. He probably amazed the peanut too. Asking for God's help, he found 300 uses for the peanut: shampoo, ink, rubbing oil, metal polish, peanut oil, peanut milk, peanut cream, peanut cheese, and peanut butter were just a few. Up to this time, people had thought peanuts were just for kids. A plan for everything. Little by little, farmers in the South changed their minds about growing only cotton. Peanuts became their next choice. Then Professor Carver told them about the soybean. From the soybean, they could get milk and oil. Professor Carver did not stop. As he began to study each new plant, he would ask, "God, you have a plan for everything. I know you have a plan for this plant. Show it to me." But he no longer asked God what his plan was for himself. He already knew that. He was helping every farmer in the South by exploring a part of God's world. Look at the verse down here. "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good." Genesis 1:31. So George Washington Carver realized that God had given all these plants for a specific reason, and he wanted to find out what that was. And he knew that his calling was to go around and help the farmers all over. And so he traveled and he helped those farmers to be able to get the most out of their soil on their farms. So hopefully you have enjoyed learning about George Washington Carver. And if you took a shower and used shampoo, you can thank George Washington Carver for that. Now you will have a quiz that you'll do on Thursday. So you can go back and look at these videos or use your book to complete that quiz either on Edmodo or through the sheet that I emailed. So hopefully that will be helpful to you, and thank you for watching. Bye.